A jury has found FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried guilty in his closely watched fraud trial. The former crypto king was charged with 2 counts of fraud and 5 counts of conspiracy. Over the month-long trial, prosecutors argued Bankman-Fried stole billions of dollars from customers to back his crypto-focused hedge fund, Alameda Research. FTX declared bankruptcy a year ago, with customers racing to withdraw funds. The collapse shocked cryptocurrency markets. Bankman-Fried faces more than 100 years in prison. CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman joins us now. Rikki, before we get to what Bankman-Fried faces, I'm just curious about the verdict. It came after about a day of deliberation. One of the questions I always had about this case was it incredibly complicated, which is what Bankman-Fried used to, when he talked about crypto and his trading firm and all that, it sounded quite complicated and difficult. Or was it, as prosecutors claim, basically an old-fashioned, pretty simple fraud where somebody was misrepresenting what they were doing? What does a day's worth of deliberation tell you about that question? Was it complicated, or in the end, did the jury find it pretty easy?
The jury found it more simple than complicated, John, and that is because the prosecutors were very smart about how they presented it. You did not have to understand how cryptocurrency works. You did not have to understand even what it was, because in order to do that, you would have to have been taught a very arcane subject. It's a subject that most of us really do not understand. So what the prosecution did was it looked at it in the aggregate and really made it simple. Fraud is fraud. Stealing is stealing. If you have access to billions of dollars of other people's money, and you decide that you're going to use it for your own purposes, that is a multi-million-dollar home in the Bahamas, political donations, charitable donations, financing your lifestyle, that what the government made it look like was just apparently what the jurors believed. It was stealing. It was fraud, and he intended to do it. It was not something that was so esoteric that he somehow was in above his head and he made a mistake, which was his defense.
And Rikki, what does life look like for him now? If you were his lawyer, what are his lawyers telling him now about what the next parts in this process will be for him?
Well, he is in serious trouble. If you add up all of the counts, you're looking at something like 110 years in prison. However, that is not ultimately what he's facing. But what he's facing is not going to be anything that looks like 3 months or 3 years. What happens, John, in the normal course of events is that the Office of Probation, which really communicates with the court, is going to take a look at the aggregate of the amount of money that was stolen, is going to look at each count for which there is a conviction. And here there were 7 counts, 7 convictions. They are then going to look at a grid, which is what we call the sentencing guidelines. And what the Office of Probation will do is it will tell the judge, according to the grid, what would be the appropriate sentence. Now, the government has input into that grid, and as well, the defense has input. And the defendant, to date, has not really shown any remorse. So remorse would have been a mitigating factor that might have helped this defendant. So what the judge does is the judge can, and most usually will, stay within the guidelines, whatever they turn out to be, which we will find out at a later date. And that would be where the sentence will lie.
Rikki Klieman, CBS News legal analyst, the only person I want to talk to when there's legal news like this. Rikki, thank you so much. And now we go to CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett, who joins me now from outside the courthouse. Errol, what was it like, the mood inside the courtroom?
John, I can tell you after stepping outside the courtroom where Sam Bankman-Fried stood and learned his fate, he was reactionless, standing stoically as the floor person read the jury's decision. Guilty on all 7 counts, one by one, unanimous decisions. I have the actual verdict in my hands here, and Sam Bankman-Fried's parents were seated about 2 rows in front of me, holding each other in anticipation of this verdict. As soon as each verdict was read, guilty, one after another, I watched as Sam Bankman-Fried's father's head fell into his hands and then effectively into his lap as his wife, Mr. Bankman-Fried's mother, put her arm around him. So his parents certainly showed a level of devastation and shock from this ruling. Sam Bankman-Fried himself appeared emotionless as he now found out that this jury of 12 New Yorkers over the past 5+ weeks heard his testimony and didn't believe him, and returned a verdict which found that, in their view, he did not tell the truth and he is a fraud.
Errol, you've been following this trial, and when you cover a trial, there's a sort of a rhythm in the room and a sense that one gets from watching the jurors take all of this in. What was their surprise that this verdict was reached this soon? What was the kind of sense from this long process crescendoing to this moment once the actual verdict was read?
Well, what's interesting, John, is watching the testimony over the past several weeks, it was clear that from the prosecution standpoint, they had a slam dunk case effectively. You had 3 of Sam Bankman-Fried's lieutenants pleading guilty to the charges of money laundering and fraud. Each of them took the witness stand to detail how, first, when they found out that customer money was being used to fortify all these other funds and projects, they disagreed with it. They brought it up to Sam Bankman-Fried, and he told them each step of the way to keep going. But when Sam Bankman-Fried took the stand in his own defense, which was an incredibly brazen thing to do, considering that he put himself at risk and made himself susceptible to the very well-prepared cross-examination from the prosecution, it was clear that his behavior in front of the defense, when they delicately walked him through how it was overwhelming for him and how, in good faith, he didn't realize he was misusing funds. But when the prosecution gave him pointed questions based on the testimony, based on the evidence, based on his own words to the press, to investors, and to the general public through his tweets and voluminous interviews that he did with just about everybody, he couldn't remember things. Ultimately, in closing arguments, John, it came down to this. The prosecution said when Sam Bankman-Fried was being asked questions by the defense, he knew things. He was quick. He was knowledgeable. He was speaking in a very long-winded with sentences. He could define 50 separate terms, but his demeanor completely changed under cross-examination. They said more than 140 times he couldn't remember details, conversations, or the allegations that he was up against. It is apparent that to the jury made it seem as if he wasn't telling the truth, which means he perjured himself on the stand. The judge continuously had to interrupt him and say, just answer the question, and it appears he did himself no favors. The man known for taking massive risks on the off chance that maybe things would collapse, but perhaps there's a huge upside, took a gamble on his own fate here during this trial, and it most certainly did not pay off.
Great detail, great reporting. Errol Barnett, thank you so much.